All right, we are live. Welcome back to the American Prospects weekly Roundup live show. I am Ryan Cooper, senior editor, filling in for David Dayan, my boss and executive editor of the Prospect. And today with us, I've got James Baratta, writing fellow at the Prospect. Welcome, James.
Thanks for having me.
Um, the first thing that we wanted to talk about today was the New York City mayoral debate. We have obviously, for folks who haven't been paying attention, there was a primary, the Democratic primary, the only one that matters in the city, which Zoran Mamdani won in an incredible come from behind victory, defeated Andrew Cuomo, but Andrew Cuomo did not, respect the idea of the party, um, and so is now running as an independent. And according to the latest polls, Mamdani has a commanding lead over him and Curtis Sliwa, right? I think that's how you say his name. Um, but nevertheless, they're still going to have a general election, and there's no ranked choice voting this time. It's, first past the post. And so they had to have a debate. And we had to be able to discuss the vital issues facing the residents of New York City. Um, and, I watched some of it, but, I have a young son, and so I didn't stay up for the whole thing. But you did, James. So first, what were your overall thoughts? Maybe I can read. We recently published an article by my colleague Whitney Wimbish, and the title of it is "Mamdani Dog Walks Disgraced Ex-Governor Cuomo in First New York City Mayoral Debate." And I believe Lauren has put that in the chat if you want to check it out. But is that an accurate summary in your view?
I would definitely say so. Even just seeing like a notification on my phone today with Politico reporting, that Mamdani established like clear dominance in the debate. And just I think that's quite telling of what really unfolded last night. But it was really interesting for me to see Cuomo saying that Mamdani was basically not a Democrat, that he was so far to the left and a socialist, so that he, despite losing the Democratic primary to Mamdani, still saying that. So that was definitely, a sticking point for me. But there was a lot of really, I think, interesting topics that were discussed that Mamdani hadn't spoken explicitly about yet, specifically regarding Israel, saying that Hamas should definitely lay down their weapons when asked that question by the moderators. And, speaking, just kind of continuing to reorient the conversation around what his campaign is running on, which is affordability and access to adequate services from, grocery stores and buses to free buses, just sort of all those kinds of things, really reorienting the conversation around that. But not only that, also just New Yorkers and what their needs are and being able to be the person that meets those needs.
Yeah, it's particularly galling, as you say, hearing that from Andrew Cuomo, the guy, who is, again, just disrespecting the very idea of having a party primary. We're going to have an election. This is kind of a weird idea. It doesn't exist in most country of having a state-run primary for, who's going to represent the party in the general election, and then you lose that, and then you just say, okay, well, forget that result. I'm going to run anyway as an independent, and then criticize the other guy for not for being somehow a fake Democrat. But it goes even deeper than that because Cuomo, for old heads who may not remember, Cuomo literally conspired with Republicans to give them control of the New York State Senate for like half a decade. This was back in the early 2010s. I think it was in 2011 when the first conspiracy took place, but around that time, basically, New York is a state where the Democratic Party is overwhelmingly dominant. And so he created this breakaway faction of Democrats called the Independent Democratic Caucus. And so they could run sort of as Democrats, but they caucused with Republicans in the state Senate. And so they had, basically a stranglehold on what could pass or not. And Cuomo ultimately was the person to sign off on this. And it's one of those things where it's just the Cuomo's brand of incredibly vile Machiavellian scheming to like no particular reason. It was like, why do you want to do this? Why give Republicans? Because you're just like blockading the ability of your own party to like achieve things that you might run on. And I guess, it's sort of a legacy of Clintonite triangulation where you don't want to have to sign a lot of bills that you think are going to be unpopular because they would have been unpopular 30 years ago. Nevertheless, just a digression into history to recognize this guy is not a partisan. He is not a loyal Democrat. He has stabbed the party in the back over and over again, and he's doing it again right now, running against the party members' choice for mayor. And luckily, though, if the polls are any indication, he's going to get rinsed, and he deserves it. Um, any thoughts, that like you mentioned the focus on Israel, and just I mean this entire campaign, like that this seems to have been the Cuomo play from him and his big money donors. They're like, we're gonna basically say that Mamdani is a terrorist, that he supports Hamas, he's an extreme, just trigger the old post 9/11 Islamophobia, and we'll run on that. And it's, it would be ridiculous in any context, but in the city mayoral election, where the New York mayor doesn't have like a foreign policy, it's particularly bizarre. So, do you have any sense as to how that sort of was playing out? Did it seem like Cuomo landed any hits there, or was it mostly just sort of desperate?
I would say it seemed desperate to me because, as Mamdani had actually pointed out last night, the extent to which Cuomo has been doing outreach with various religious organizations, specifically the Muslim community. I think by bringing it back to, the extent to which Mamdani has been engaging with faith groups for, just in the months preceding this moment now, I think by doing that, he was really able to kind of prevent these sort of Cuomo punches from landing and basically kind of striking back in a way that really reframed it around New Yorkers and not only meeting the needs of just one or two single communities, but really focusing on, whatever the outcome of this, election is. Just know that like, this campaign is basically here to work with you in the event that Mamdani becomes mayor.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, to having gone back and watching some of the, the clips and bits of the debate at the time, I think Zoran, his performance is really instructive for, practitioners of politics. That like this guy's a pretty seasoned operator, and he's really quite good at the sort of blocking and tackling of political performance, for lack of a better word, in 2025, from his obvious, skill among, you know, himself and his video team for doing stuff on TikTok and YouTube and whatnot. But also in, the fact that he didn't let himself get destabilized by all of this nonsense about Israel, that he just kept turning the focus back to, his preferred sort of talking points, for lack of a better word, um, to make the focus. I mean, it's there's a little bit of cynicism in there, I think, but it's a necessary part of political rhetoric that, like, I don't want to talk about Israel because Israel doesn't have anything to do with my campaign or what I'm going to be doing as mayor. And so I'm not going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about affordability and building more houses and serving the my constituents. And that's, it's just he's got promise, I guess. He's got some promise. We'll see if he does win, which seems likely. He's got promise. Uh,
Mm. I did want to point out from our colleague Whitney Kurgwamich's article just a moment, about an hour and 20 minutes into the debate when Mamdani had said, you know, at this point in the debate, like you still have not said the word affordability one time. And I think that just kind of really encapsulated, um, the extent to which Mamdani has just really brought the conversation and just throughout the night, bringing it back to, being able to meet the needs of New Yorkers and ensure that they have access to, adequate and stable services. And I just thought the way, this one sentence really stuck out to me, just saying when he wrote, it was a quiet moment compared to the rest of the debate, but it was emblematic of the emptiness of the heart of the Democratic establishment and a reflection of how poorly suited its membership is to post the Mad King. Sorry. Yeah, the Mad Kings of our era. Um, so, yeah, definitely just a really pivotal moment, I think, in the debate.
Yeah. So anyway, we'll be keeping our eye on that here at the Prospect. The second thing that I wanted to mention was this flotilla story. So you've got a piece on the if I believe that was your most recent piece, correct? On the um
Global Samud Flotilla.
flotilla activists. Can you get into that for us?
Be happy to. So earlier this month, between October 1st and October 3rd, Israeli forces had intercepted over 40 humanitarian aid vessels in the Mediterranean Sea and international waters. Uh, there were about 450 activists from countries all over the world, including the United States, brought to a maximum security prison in the middle of the desert. They were held there. Most of the American citizens were held there for uh, 6 days, and during that time, it as the letter that I had referenced in that story shows the Democratic senators, including Elizabeth Warren and Ed Markey, had basically submitted a letter to the State Department saying, uh, "It took you guys 4 days to assess the well-being of American citizens that were basically, in Israeli custody in this prison." And the focus, I think, of the campaign and also, really the piece, I thought it was just sort of an essential thing that needed to be done in terms of focusing the conversation on what the mission of the flotilla has been. And despite not being successful, there were sort of, as one of the flotilla activists, Adnan Musto, who I spoke with, who's a captain of the Mykonos, told me the flotilla movement has sort of really kind of forced world leaders and the global community to come to terms with this complicity in the genocide and basically to um, understand that there's outrage there and we did see that on quite a large scale, especially throughout Europe, just protests of hundreds of thousands of people at a single, location just unfolding. And seeing that for Adnan, he told me that that was partly why, he sort of understands that this taking part in this mission was a humanitarian service that is actually like moving the needle. But yeah, happy to get more into sort of what exactly happened with the State Department and really even the conditions in the prison.
Oh yeah, I mean, maybe just to back up a little bit, like but the intention of this thing, if I understand correctly, like they're trying to run this blockade, which is clearly illegal by the law of the sea, international law, stretching back like 800 years or something like that. Blockades. There's rules about how you're supposed to do blockades. It involves, usually declarations of war. Um, and a lot of people don't always follow those rules, of course, throughout history. And yet, if it were just about any other country in the world in a comparable position to Israel, sort of smallish, medium income country, like if Finland were trying to blockade Estonia or something like that, like that would not be allowed. That would not be countenanced by, the great powers or whatever you want to call them. Like there would be action in terms of aircraft carriers, to run that, to force that blockade open. And yet Israel is allowed to get away with it. And that's what they're sort of trying, these civilians. That's another war crime, right? They shot at these the flotilla boats in international waters, right? Another war crime. But they're trying to illustrate the total lawlessness of Israel's behavior, right?
And that is exactly how it was described to me by Nadia Millerone, who is the mother of Adnan Musto and Tor Musto, Adnan's younger brother. For her part, she really did focus on, sort of how these companies, by way of the Israeli military, are testing out coercive instruments on basically what is a stateless population, people from all over the world, in international waters. Um, Adnan Musto was hit in the back and in the back of the head with a high pressure water cannon. And he told me when that had happened, it felt like he saw stars. And when it also hit his back, he was just fortunate that, he wasn't, the way he put it was maybe not the way to describe it here, but was not severely injured as a result of that. But he really did think for some time after that had happened that he had sustained damage to his internal organs, just given the pressure of that. But yeah, I mean, the whole complexity of the Global Samud Flotilla, specifically having over 40 vessels, for Israel to apprehend all of the activists and intercept those vessels, it logistically is very unlikely that it would be able to do that when the flotilla had reached Israeli territorial waters, right? So basically, Israel neglecting maritime and international law is going ahead and intercepting, and at the time had intercepted all vessels, all 42 aid vessels and two legal aid vessels at sea as a result.
Yeah, it's a consistent pattern of behavior. Something I've done many times. There was one of these back in what was it, 2009? People did like the Israeli commandos, came and landed on the boat, um and I think also another pattern you see here is the like sort of lack of regard, among most Western countries but especially the United States for the welfare of their own citizens. It's like normally this is a classic behavior how states are supposed to operate. Like if your citizens are in some place and like a war breaks out, the government, the diplomatic apparatus is supposed to get in there and evacuate those people. It's supposed to notify them to say, come to the embassy, we'll get you out of here. This is our job as the government of for, you folks, you citizens, we're going to help you. And yet Israel takes these American citizens and throws them into a dungeon without sufficient, food or water, and the government doesn't care. It's like this sort of half-hearted thing, if anything. Be like, oh yeah, did you illegally kidnap some of our people or what? I don't know. I mean, it's probably worse under Trump, but it's been like that before as well. Just this total deference to Israel in terms of, abusing our citizens.
I thought it was interesting when Nadia Millerone had told me she highlighted Israel and the United States' diplomatic relationship and just really wondered why it felt like the State Department really was dragging its feet with this. Basically, when she was able to get more information from them about the state of her two sons, the State Department had assured them that, they were receiving adequate food and water. But for the first 4 days or 3 or 4 days within that time frame, the 6 full days that they were in there, uh, the flotilla activists who were detained at Ketsiat prison were denied access to legal representation, medications, and medical treatment. There was at one point, Adnan had told me about when they basically the activists were chanting about needing insulin for folks who had diabetes and needed to maintain their, the amount of insulin they have. And basically, he recalls an Israeli prison guard telling him and the rest of the activists, no doctors for animals. And that just really that stuck with me when I heard that. And, I also really thought it was um, like just powerful that he had brought it back to, despite everything we faced, his brother Tor had sustained several beatings as a result of trying to give his passport to his legal representation. And just despite all that hardship, they were very intentional about saying, this is why we did this. to establish a humanitarian corridor to Gaza. And even though we weren't able to do that this time, the Palestinian people on the shoreline were actually able to fish using their own nets in their own hands. And I thought that was also quite powerful.
Yeah. Yeah, Greta Thunberg was among these folks as well, right? There was a piece that the
Yes,
Swedish publication recently ran about her. Um, yeah, did you want to jump in on that?
sure. The experience of Greta Thunberg in Katia prison definitely echoed sort of what Tor Musa had experienced as well. And I think the thing that stood out to me from that article specifically was when Greta had looked up at Itamar Ben-Gvir. Each time she would do that, a guard would kick her. And I mean, the sort of extent to which a citizen of a country where, not necessarily as close diplomatic ties with the as the United States has with Israel, but still to have that happen. She also had reiterated that like consider what they're doing to us and understand what they are doing to civilians in Palestine.
Yeah, yeah, shocking on two levels. I mean, I guess not shocking, but indicative that, yeah, on the one hand, they're willing to do this, to torture, a young white woman, international celebrity, extremely famous person, um, out, you know, with the participation. He's a member of the cabinet, the Israeli cabinet, right? Like the security minister or something like that.
The national security minister, yes.
Yeah, yeah. And, just like a Bull Connor sadistic torturer guy. That's just who runs the Israeli government now and the Israeli military. But yeah, and then on the other hand, you have to imagine that it would be much, much, much worse for the, powerless Gazans who are in many cases just summarily executed. Um, so anyway, I guess a major props to them for putting their lives at hazard to illustrate this atrocious situation. Uh, you wanted to bring up there's a lever story, right, about the a bunch of goodies for the Israeli military in the latest military budget that was passed. You want to talk about that?
Yes. Yes, so on October 9th, the Senate passed the National Defense Authorization Act. Basically, that was had increased the military's budget by 100 billion to 914 billion. It was mostly bipartisan, 77 senators voting in favor and 20 voting against. In that package, it does include $50 million for the Israeli military to develop like emerging wartime technologies. So that could be everything from artificial intelligence to sort of the automated system of warfare and just security infrastructure that has been used not only in Palestine, in Gaza, but also in the West Bank. And it also does include this an extension of this one the War Rescue Stock Act. It's basically an unlimited stockpile for Israel to draw from at any time without congressional authorization. And basically that which is extended by 2 years. And also previously the cap for that was set at 200 million, and now there is no longer a cap on the amount of funding for that stockpile.
Yeah, this is why I think Israel behaves that way. They kidnap a bunch of Western citizens from Europe and the United States and elsewhere, and they torture them and hold them, kidnap them, hold them incommunicado without medicine, and in return, they get tens of hundreds of millions of dollars from the American government that they don't need to use on munitions that will probably be used against civilian populations, and either in international waters or in Gaza or the West Bank. Why would they behave any differently? It's only rational. Um, Still worth noting, though, and I think to turn it back briefly to our New York mayoral discussion, I think it's pretty indicative of the fact that, Cuomo's campaign is just floundering, it is indicative of the fact rather that especially among Democrats, just knee-jerk deference to Israel and just giving them tons and tons of free weapons and money all the time, no matter what they do, is very unpopular. I think that Zoran Mamdani's position on this stuff is closer to the median American voter than Cuomo's is. That wasn't the case even 5 years ago, I don't think, even among Democrats. Democrats are more sympathetic to Israel than Palestinians. But, they've just completely torched all of their, stock of credibility. And I think normal people are turning to this and being like, what are we getting out of this? What's the point? How is this helping anyone, including Israel? It's a good question. Uh, Perhaps we should pivot to the shutdown, in the back half of our episode here. We're talking, of course, about the government being shut down indefinitely now. Uh, there's no sign that it's going to reopen. Um, you know, we we could potentially mention a little. It seems like a kind of an unstable situation, because um, listeners may not know this, but the shutdown is not that old of a thing. The shutdowns did not happen before about 1980. And at that point, that was when Jimmy Carter's attorney general basically invented the idea. Previously, if Congress had failed to pass a budget, then basically the government would keep going on autopilot and they would assume, basically whatever budget you had before, you just keep assuming that that's going to be your budget now. And if Congress wants to change it, they can change it whenever they get around to passing the budget. Um, but in 1980, they came up with this much more strict version interpretation of the Anti-Deficiency Act. Um, Saying that if Congress doesn't pass a budget, then the government has to shut down, or at least parts of the government, because you immediately have to say, like, well, okay, that doesn't apply to everything because that means the country would fall to pieces. But at any rate, that's what's happening now. Congress could not pass a budget, despite the fact that Republicans control both the House and the Senate. They have not gotten rid of the filibuster for normal legislation, and so they need seven Democratic votes, and they didn't have seven. I think they had one or two. Um, and so, yeah, the government's shut down, and what makes it unstable is that it's kind of unclear what Trump even actually thinks about the budgetary authority. He has shut down unilaterally all kinds of stuff. USAID is just completely shuttered. It's not, functioning at all. That may kill 14 million people if it's not restored and at some point. That's unconstitutional, illegal. That the way that the Constitution is set up, Congress appropriates the money, writes the legislation. Here are the agencies. The president has a care to faithfully execute the laws, and he's just not doing that. And he's not doing it in other contexts as well. But for some reason, he's obeying the sort of the tradition of the shutdown, sort of. And the one innovation he's carried out recently is to pay military members. He's taking money that has been appropriated for military research and development, basically a pot of money specifically earmarked by Congress for particular uses that do not include paying the troops and using it to pay the troops. After having promised Congress, administration officials have promised Congress that they would not do that. Um, and it's like you're just sort of teetering on the edge of a total collapse of the governing order as it's been understood in this country for, since basically it started up in the, 1789. Now, Trump, with apparently no pushback whatsoever from the Supreme Court or from Congress, at least as controlled by Republicans, is just asserting unilateral authority over the budget. And at that point, it's like, why do we even have a Congress? What are they doing? We just have a president who does whatever he wants all the time. He can just like make new laws, create, destroy, modify any agencies he sees fit. And, it's a scary situation. Any initial
And
comments on?
among those agencies is the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which
Yep.
Roosevelt pretty much showed his hand and said, the plan is to eliminate the CFPB, as you and David noted in the article.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. The CFPB, they don't like it. They don't like protecting consumers' finances. Consumers' finances are for the depredations of Donald Trump, Elon Musk, and sundry other parasites, grifters, and criminals uh, to be looted for their own personal benefit. Um, and yeah, um, as I've been reading a lot of English history books, and so in the article, I get into probably excessive detail about a bunch of English kings. But where this comes from, of course, where the principle of Congress having the power of the purse, that comes directly out of English history. This is what touched off the English Civil War in the 1600s. You had Charles I, who was a big believer in the divine right of kings. He thought that he should run everything, but there's hundreds of years of precedent at that point that, for most forms of taxation, you had to get the consent of Parliament. The king did, that is. The king had to call a Parliament and he had to get them to sign off on whatever, types of revenue he wanted to raise to go, usually to go fight some war somewhere. Uh, there were a few, aside from a few exceptions, but all the big ones, he had to get consent of Parliament, and he really hated that idea. And every time he tried to call Parliament, they wouldn't do what he wanted, so he just didn't do that, and he just, tried to get around it all different types of ways. He tried, leaning on these archaic modes of taxation that hadn't really been used in the hundreds of years. He tried, calling lots of different parliaments, and they all didn't like him. And he tried imprisoning leaders of parliament, which backfired too. He was a real clumsy oaf. This is your classic revolutionary precursor king. A big, stupid, clumsy oaf who can't handle a difficult situation and makes everything worse. I wonder if that has any commonalities with our current would-be monarch. Um, but that it ended up in a big war between the parliamentarians and the royalists, and the parliamentarians eventually won, and they eventually cut off Charles I's head. They killed him. And the principle, as it had evolved over hundreds of years, of the like the community of the realm, meaning wealthy landowning nobles for the most part, but like other people aside from the king who had some power. It's like they needed to sign off on certain things. You can't just have one guy running around making all the decisions without anybody else having any say so, because he's going to screw everything up. That's what he's going to do. And he's, a lot of times what screwing everything up was taking my stuff, but that it was a decent principle that they had stumbled across, and it eventually sort of led to, the establishment of English democracy some hundreds of years later. And this, cashed out in the Glorious Revolution of 1688, where they just got rid of a king who was being a pain in the butt and replaced him with a couple of, foreign, placeholders. It's like, William and Mary, come over here and you'll be the king, except really Parliament's in charge now fully for the most part. And that was only 90 years, less than 90 years before 1776. So all the founding fathers, like, they were thinking directly about that. They were thinking about, the history of English rights. And a big part of the why the revolution happened was they thought that the king was stepping on their rights that they deserved as English, the English liberties. Um, and it's just the same thing again. The guy wants the money. He's taking the money and he's going to do whatever he wants with it. And, you get a sense that there have been a lot of hard-won lessons from over the years that have just vanished, or were never learned at all in the minds of the American people. Um,
I
at
think
any
the
rate,
utility in, sorry, I was just going to say that I think there's just a lot of utility in, looking at the current moment that we're in that context, because foundationally, these are the sort of principles that uh, are part of our governing structure and part of what makes democracy what it is as well. And I think it's just a very useful way to look at sort of the many ways in which the current administration is just trying to basically um, have that power of the purse in a sense.
yeah. Yeah, and I think history is useful also, and that it shows you the way that this type of conflict has played out. I think that Americans really struggle to imagine a situation in which the rules of the game, the sort of basic constitutional framework that we've all taken for granted forever, is just like inoperative. And it gets much more down into political brass tacks, like armed men have control of what building, because that's how, a lot of these civil conflicts in England ended up being resolved over the years. Who has London? Who has the Tower of London? Where's the king? Can we win this battle? And, the fact is, like, the Trump and the Supreme Court are tearing up the Constitution. And so even if you think that it's great, I think that while the founders did good in their own time, there was an advancement on what had come before it, but that was 250 years ago. We've learned a little bit about democratic governance since then. It's gone. Pretty much gone. It doesn't mean that democracy is over forever or that there's nothing left to do, but like the constitutional settlement we've all grown up in is dead. Trump and the Supreme Court killed it with the connivance of Republicans in Congress. And you just have to think about more basic types of political contestation, um, including, and maybe this is a good segue to another topic we wanted to bring up, the No Kings protest coming up tomorrow on Saturday, the 18th. Are you going to be covering any of these, James?
I wish I would be able to. I'm actually going to be airborne as part of some reporting I'll be doing for my print piece, but we will definitely have many colleagues of ours on the ground reporting out the scene from the folks practicing joyful resistance in the streets on Saturday.
Great. Yeah, I'm going to one here in Pennsylvania. I'm going to be there with my, almost 2-year-old son. I think it's sort of sign of the times. This is his fourth protest he's been to since he was born. I don't know how many protests I had been to when I was 2 years old. I don't think it was very many. I don't think it was four. Uh,
I
but
did want to ask you about No Kings, specifically with regard to a comment Scott Bessent had made, Trump's Treasury Secretary, on, I think it was like NBC or just a sort of like financial it's a program. Basically, was saying that the No Kings rally is going to be this like crazy event where all these basically crazy lefties are going to be protesting. And, the sort of comments were similar to what Speaker Mike Johnson had said as well, about there being Marxists sort of out in full display. And I just thought it was interesting to hear those comments just because, I had gone to the last No Kings mobilization to report on it. And, it definitely didn't strike me as, there being chaos in the streets and sort of people like running around and like wrecking things. It was, for the most part, like at least in Manhattan, we were barely moving, just like in the march because there's just so many people with like holding signs and like American flags and rainbow flags, and all sorts of flags and just other signage that is basically just anti-autocracy. And hearing from the folks on the ground at that time, you know, I would expect that there, maybe is a bit more frustration at this point, this far into the sort of, current administration. But from my understanding and what I saw with my own eyes, it didn't really seem like a this unhinged sort of event where like chaos was raining down in the streets.
yeah, it's preposterous. It's preposterous what he's saying, and others, but Mike Johnson, right, was saying it's like the Hate America rally. And Um, I think it reveals maybe a little bit of fear, I think, on the right, that in fact the bulk of the citizenry is behind this type of thing, that most Americans don't want autocracy. They don't want Trump to have, unfettered authority over every aspect of our lives. That's not how we are raised. That's not the principles this country was, supposedly very hypocritically, especially at the start, but it was what they wrote down in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. Um, and, I mean, the plain fact of the matter is that if any faction in this country hates America as it exists, today or in 2024 anyway, it's the conservatives, it's the Republicans. They hate cosmopolitanism, they hate diversity, they hate democracy. And that's what, this country, for all of its flaws, basically has been since 1965-ish. It's very diverse. It's only what, like 60% non-Hispanic white. Even within that white population, there's huge diversity of backgrounds, people from all over the place in Europe and elsewhere. Um, Tons of languages, Spanish, de facto second language. Everybody speaks a little bit of it. You almost can't help it because it's just ubiquitous. Uh, the food from all over the globe, that's enriched everyone's lives. Who doesn't appreciate all the dizzying varieties of different types of ethnic food you can get in even some pretty small cities around this country? And I think, that you look at the actions of the administration and you see why that arbitrary rule is bad for the people. That a government of laws and elections and regular order is better. You look at Scott Bessent. What is he doing? Well, he's orchestrating probably a farm bailout that will benefit him personally, as he has direct interests in a massive quantity of soybean farms. And they're orchestrating a 20 billion, or maybe it's 40 billion, who knows, bailout of Argentina, where some of his cronies have massive um, financial interests. And it's like, yeah, that's what happens. That's what autocrats do. They rule selfishly. They arrange institutions and money to benefit themselves and their close associates and not the people. It's like this, we're sort of back to the very first page of Civics 101. Why do we have a government? Well, if it's just one guy and he can do whatever he wants, he's going to take all the money for himself. And you're like, ah, dang, that's right. That's exactly what is happening. Um, and yeah, so, every time I've been there, it's just like the most normie people, even more normie. I'd say Black Lives Matter protests. I attended those as well. These are significantly even more normie than that. It's just like grandmas and people out with their kids. People have silly signs or they're wearing silly costumes and stuff. And if there's any violence in any of these things, it's invariably started by the cops or ICE going in there and instigating people and just like rounding them up, shooting pepper balls at collared priests for fun. Um, and it's, that's just how it is. That's what autocrats do. Uh,
Think, but I will say the parallels between Israel frantically responding to a bunch of civilian vessels carrying humanitarian aid and seemingly the current administration's response to a bunch of peaceful protesters exercising their First Amendment rights, I think is just quite telling of sort of where the priorities on their end respectively lie.
no, absolutely. Um, and maybe one last comment on the rally question. Um, I think it can be pretty demoralizing to think about where we are at this moment. It's certainly not where you'd want to be. We could have elected Kamala Harris and sort of been just like how things were in 2024. But no, that's not how it worked out. But, the fact of this guy, Trump, in office facing mass unrest, wobbly at best economy, collapsing popularity, underwater on every single issue, basically, that anyone asks about, including immigration. Um, and that's 9 months into his rule before, like the tariffs, the damage the tariffs have caused to the economy are going to take, I'd say probably a year or maybe even two to have full effect to see what's going to happen there. It could be looking at a big pop of a financial bubble in the AI space. Um, so this is not a guy playing with the strongest possible hand. The best way for an autocrat to consolidate power is to actually be really popular. And that's how they've done it in the past. That's how Putin did it. Putin was extremely popular, 70, 80% approval rating in the late 2000s when he abolished Russian democracy. And one of the things that he never did was mess with the healthcare system, which Trump has done with the big beautiful bill, cutting almost $1 trillion out of Medicaid, cutting food stamps, cutting ACA subsidies. Healthcare premiums are going to like double for the average person next year, unless there's something changes with the result of a bailout or the negotiations with the shutdown. They might reverse that, and so the this is not a thing that is impossible to stop at all, despite the fact that the Constitution is, if we're being honest with ourselves, a dead letter for the most part. We still will have elections probably next year. And, the fact that they're sending these goons, these ICE goons, a lot of whom now are reportedly Proud Boys or other fascists, out to shoot priests in the head. This is a type of, media that is very much what a rational dictator does not want to see. You don't want to be very unpopular. That's what, you risk causing a chaotic collapse of your regime, losing your legitimacy among the armed cadres that support you. Um, and, this is your sort of classic color revolution formula from, in Eastern Europe. You have a sick democracy with an aspiring autocrat who overreaches and it causes mass protests. And, eventually this was Euromaidan in Ukraine, where it came to a point of the cops versus these protesters and Maidan Square, and eventually the president, the Russian puppet guy, um, Yanukovych, he fled the country, and that's not an unreasonable goal to aim for. Um, that
On
or
that note,
something like it.
I did want to mention some former State Department officials had put out a report basically saying that, they were seeing those exact elements that you're describing here in the United States under the current administration. And these are State Department officials who had studied and sort of witnessed these, changes in the sort of political environment leaning toward autocracy and other countries in different parts of the world, particularly Europe, and they basically said that they, were expressing kind of this major concern about the direction currently that the country is heading here.
Yeah, I mean it's obvious, and I think that in the past, we a lot of Americans have been kind of snooty about like Eastern Europe, the sort of former Eastern Bloc countries like Ukraine that have dealt with oligarchs and unstable democracies, and we're like, huh, glad we don't have problems like that. Well, now we do. And we don't know how to deal with it yet, like the Ukrainians did. I think a lot of people are sort of stunned and demoralized at the idea that the old ways of turning out a bad president, of just going to a fair election that you don't have to do anything to secure and just voting for the other guy, that might not be possible. And like, well, what now? Well, one answer is you get out on the street. And I think that that's a good place to start uh, in tomorrow on Saturday. Um, Let's see. We got a few more minutes here. I've got a couple more topics. One thing actually I want is sort of in keeping with what we've been mentioning is this the Trump shooting at boats in the Caribbean. Have you been watching the that at all?
I definitely have been paying attention to that. It's kind of a hard thing not to think about when your government is basically operating as like in a foreign country essentially, and basically carrying out strikes on alleged drug trafficking boats, I would say. But yes, happy to chat about that.
Yeah, I wanted to mention it briefly because right as we were getting on, I noticed an article from the New York Times, and the Times reporter has they have found for the first time possibly the identity of one of the victims. Um, and it says, quote, Chad Joseph, a 26-year-old from Trinidad and Tobago who had been living in Venezuela in recent months, told his family he would soon be taking a short boat ride back home. He has yet to return, and now his family fears the worst. On Thursday, his name spread across social media with users saying he was one of 6 people aboard a suspected drug vessel that had been blown up by the U.S. military this week. Uh, the U.S. military has destroyed 5 boats that is alleged were ferrying drugs in the United States, killing 27 people. And despite the mounting death toll, no authority has come forward to publicly release the names of any of the dead. Um, and now it seems possibly, I mean, I'm not sure if it's confirmed, they haven't found anybody's body yet, but it was just some guy who's going from Venezuela to Trinidad and Tobago, and they just blew him up because they thought, oh, that might be a drug guy, drug boat there, kill them all. And whoops, it's just some random person.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that I feel like uh, is reminiscent of what our sort of foreign operations were in like the 1980s in other countries, particularly in South America. And I am just very disturbed by the fact that current sort of idea is to, you know, uh, prevent drug trafficking and mitigate it, is to basically carry out extrajudicial killings on civilian vessels that may or may not be smuggling drugs. And, while there may be, say, drug smugglers on that boat and civilians as well, however, sort of things are, whatever the case may be, this is a foreign country basically violating another country's sovereignty and carrying out, exercises that uh, are essentially, could be, considered to be, if more information is sort of becomes available on who was the victim of these attacks and strikes, I think that would definitely say quite a lot about really just how bad this really is.
Yeah, presumably eventually it will probably come out, who this was and what they were doing for at least some of them, because they're probably going to keep doing it. Um, but yeah, I think it's worth emphasizing a little bit in that, uh, you know, most prior actions of this kind, like when Obama assassinated American citizens, or Anwar al-Awlaki and his son, who was 16 years old, Abdul Rahman al-Awlaki, it was supposed to be as part of a military campaign, so you're sort of trying to invoke the laws of war in that case, where it is, legal to kill people. That's kind of what war is. Um, and of course, there are a lot of terrible problems with that. Not least of which, like at least from what I can remember, the assassination of Abdul Rahman was accidental. Um, and all Anwar al-Awlaki did, he was a like a podcaster guy, like he was a propagandist. He wasn't engaged in war, in the sense that most people would understand it. Nevertheless, there was this felt need to pretend like you're not just blowing people up, just at random, who aren't even who aren't involved in any sort of war or anything, because what makes this, I would say, arguably, I mean, all those things are moral atrocities, but this is like an even more of an escalation, perhaps is the way to put it, is that drug trafficking is not a capital crime. It's not an act of war. This is, an offense that you could, if you are convicted, can be, sent to prison for a while. But it's not instant execution. And it certainly is not, something that you could just kill people without any sort of trial. And I think, again, we're sort of seeing the reason why you have uh, a legal system in the first place, because okay, the state, the president says that this is a drug trafficker, and the natural question is, well, how do you know? How do you know it isn't somebody else? What if it's just some fisherman out there? Shouldn't you check? Shouldn't we have to have some sort of procedure? Shouldn't you have to come into a court of law and prove, to some impartial observers, a jury or a judge, who this person actually is and what they did. You could present evidence to that effect. I mean, there's complications with it being like in international waters a lot of these times or in foreign countries, blah, blah, blah. But the principle of it is obvious. The president shouldn't just be allowed to kill anyone he wants on his say so and no evidence presented whatsoever. Because the natural next step of this is, well, these are terrorists. And everyone's a terrorist. The Democratic Party is a terrorist organization. Antifa is a terrorist, and terrorists get summarily executed. So it's worrisome.
Definitely part and parcel of what has been a consistent strategy under sort of DJT2 to basically say, we're at war, immigrants are invading our country, cartels are terrorist organizations. That all gives the sort of United States government, in this case, leeway to basically do whatever it really wants to do to basically carry out its own interests, even if those interests are not aligned with public safety or just, what voters and people in this country are, allowed to have a voice and a say on.
Yeah. Uh, and yeah, well, I mean, one last comment, in our last few minutes, I suppose, on the specific nature of drug trafficking in general. There a funny-ish subplot of the second Trump administration is that the only price of anything that's going down is, guess what? Nose candy, cocaine, baby. We're making cocaine great again. It's the 1980s, an eighth in every American junk drawer. And the reason for that is that they've been starting with Biden. Actually, they were really cracking down on fentanyl, and there have been some internal dynamics within the cartels in Mexico and Colombia, such that the cocaine cartels, from what I'm paraphrasing some Wall Street Journal reporting, um, but the cocaine cartels got access to some tunnels under the U.S.-Mexico border that had been run by the fentanyl guys, who are now in disarray. And so cocaine is flooding into the country. Your classic supply-demand dynamics happen, and the price is going way down. And, that tends to indicate that you can never solve a problem of drug consumption by blowing people up. This is something where, there's vast demand in this country for, drugs of various descriptions. And you are not going to be able to squash that out of existence with violent force and criminal prosecution. We tried that in Prohibition. We've been trying it with the war on drugs for 40, 50 years now. It doesn't work. Outside of, rare cases like Quaaludes. Quaaludes basically don't exist anymore because you need a very advanced pharmaceutical manufacturing facility to make those. Cartels aren't capable of that sort of thing. But all the other stuff, LSD, methamphetamine, cocaine, marijuana, you name it, all the big stuff. Fentanyl is quite cheap and easy to make. Um, it's too easy to make and it's too easy to smuggle, especially fentanyl and heroin and cocaine, a little bit harder, but not that much harder. Um, and so this whole idea that you're going to solve the drug crisis by blowing people up, it's ridiculous. It's never going to be solved like that. You need a comprehensive approach to deal with, like addiction at bottom, and you need to address the market dynamics that especially you could take a harm reduction approach, which kind of actually the Biden and Trump people have sort of been taking with fentanyl, which is if you drive out the fentanyl, well, then maybe you could replace it with heroin or something that is at least not so incredibly easy to overdose on. And then, people could stay alive long enough to address their addiction. But that's sort of semi-accidental. At any rate, you know, it's just an indication of the sort of blunt force stupidity of the conservative approach to everything. That, drug policy is not, we've been trying this, just say no and lock them up. Doesn't work. It's never worked. It's never going to work. Any last comments here in our last couple of minutes?
Well, just looking toward this weekend, I think what I think both of our understandings are is that this Snow Kings rally is going to be really substantially larger than the previous one, and I guess it'll be interesting to see what you and our other colleagues report on, bringing us, to places around the country and seeing sort of what is at the forefront of some of these local and obviously nationwide demonstrations.
Yeah, I'm curious myself to see how it goes. And so to find out, you'll just have to head to prospect.org for, our coverage that will probably be coming on Monday and Tuesday of these rallies and, check back in and see what happens because you never know. It's liable to be something crazy. But until that time, thanks for watching everybody on the old YouTubes. Uh, we'll be back. I think it'll be David next week, thank goodness, with another episode of the Prospects Weekly Roundup. But thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.